How's everyone doing?
Awesome.
Great. Awesome. How's everyone doing?
Great.
I didn't hear you. How's everyone doing?
Great.
Oh, that was worse than the second one. All right, so you notice we had a little background music. We're just working on trying to get everybody in tune, so I'm assuming everyone was humming along with that. We are singing out of the Blue Book this morning. It is page 64, song number 45, Let There Be Peace on Earth. Good luck. Man, that was awesome. Was I the only one having chills the whole time?
It's because it's cool in here.
You did too? You know what? Coming into the holiday season, since they're starting to set up for Christmas already at the retail stores, that was a good one to get us ready for what's to come. So let's get serious and have an invocation by Courtney Kennedy.
Person beneath us, with the bonds of Rotary between us and our worries behind us, with our goals before us and no task beyond us, with a thirst for knowledge and a dream for a tragedy-free world, we are thankful for our Rotary friends and the meal we share. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Courtney. Okay, Mike, who do we have here today as guests?
We have several guests here this morning, and good morning. And Steve, if I may make a suggestion, can we get the songbooks with the bigger print? Just a thought for some of us getting a little older there. It would be really nice. Great song, great singing. So we have some visitors here today. First of all, Dalton Miller over here, a guest of Steve Gould. Welcome, Dalton. Patrick McNeilis is over here, second time around. Good to see Patrick. We didn't scare him away the first time. And Gina Barry here with Sal Verastro, back in the back there. Gina said she knows me from East Penn, apparently, but didn't call me her old principal, which I really appreciate. Former principal is okay, old principal, no. There you go.
Thanks, Mike. She actually said to me on the side that you were a hard ass, but he can't give you a detention anymore, Gina. Neither with me, too. That's why I can say stuff like that. No, she really did. No, she really did.
Stories about you.
Yeah, I know. Watch what I say. So, anyone else put their heat on in their car this morning? Whew, it's coming fast. So, thank you to Karen Hobson this morning for being our greeter. And also to Mike Irwin and Nellie for being our table people, our sign-in people, our invocation by Courtney. Thank you so much. And Irv, thanks so much for being over at the sign-in table. Apologize about the trumpet spelling your name wrong, but it's always easy to get the I and the E and the E and the I. I also want to thank Chad Stuckey for being Peter's personal concierge chauffeur this morning. And thank you to Sue Strader for playing such a wonderful song this morning.
Oh, you have it?
Oh, you've been called out. I like it. So that means when you're not here now, Sue has to step in.
Right. You've been exposed.
Which would be kind of easy for me because I'll be like, okay, Sue, are we ready? Oh.
It has to be a suit. Has to be a suit.
So John Chishka isn't here again this week, and he wasn't able to see last week on the video because no one videotaped it, and I couldn't make fun of Rick because Rick was up in Vermont fishing about such a good job that he did on those instructions that he sent out. So I'll have to keep this on my agenda here until next week. Remember, committee signups are in the back, and also Karen, you're going to mention something?
Yep.
Okay, great. Want to mention that the RLI, if you ever hear RLI, it stands for Rotary Leadership Institute. There's one coming up on October 19th at Arcadia University in Glenside, Pennsylvania. If anyone is interested in going to that or learning more about that, email me, give me a buzz. What I can tell you is that when I went to my first RLI, I came out jazzed on Rotary. I mean, I was ready to change the world. So if you want to get, if you want to drink the Kool-Aid, let me know. Also,
I'm going to the one on October 12th in Harrisburg, if anybody wants to go with me.
okay, perfect. Now,
The difference day is the 19th.
is that RLI, is that something for,
Yeah.
that's for everybody as
Do
well?
one or two.
It's just a different regions.
It's just a different region. Okay, but you can go to the different regions, you just have to sign up. That's right. We're Region 1.
No.
No.
Don't even bother.
Okay. Thanks, Rick.
No problem.
No, I really mean it. Thank you for stopping in my tracks, because you know I'll just keep.
Steve,
Yes,
I'm an ally. You can go anywhere you want. No
Perfect.
matter where you go. There's all over the New York.
Wherever. Perfect. And what region are we? Do you know what region we are? Are we 5? 2?
We're zone 2.
Zone 2, Richard?
Yeah, but ask her where zone 2 goes to.
No.
We're zone 2.
Okay.
We have a meeting, guys, move it along.
Moving along. Don's getting antsy. So the new members of the Welcome to the World of Rotary event is happening, and that they've actually expanded that out. There's several of them, but the one for our zone is October 7th at Bravo, 6:30 to 8:30. Let me know if anyone wants to do that. And also the Purple Pinky Race, I have to remind everybody of that. Cindy's still not in the country, but again, she always signs up a team for that. But I think the best person to contact with Cindy not being here is Rick, since Rick doesn't really have much to do. And then also next week, just a reminder to all the board members and committee members and anyone who also wants to attend, as it is a makeup, we do have a board meeting immediately following our regular meeting. Okay, announcements from the floor. Rose.
Next Wednesday, I don't see Dr. Moyer here, 6 o'clock is the Youth Exchange Committee meeting at Willow Lane School. Immediately following at 6:30 will be the Youth Committee. For anybody who's on the committee, love to see you there. Anybody who wants to learn a little bit more than welcome to come.
Thank you. Uncle Puppy.
I haven't talked about paving since last week. On one of your table is a picture of the star. And I'd like to read a little thing I said here. Before she went to Northwestern a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I have to admit that I gave her partially wrong advice. Obviously, I'm very proud of her. She won MVP of the league, MVP of her school. She was selected by the Reading Eagle as the athlete of the year, the female athlete of the year for Reading area. And I told her that when she goes to Northwestern, realizing all the other kids on the team, approximately 30 girls, are all on scholarship. They're all all-stars from wherever they came from. So don't be disappointed if you're not the all-star like you were in high school, but I was wrong. She started every game so far. They played about 7 games so far. And she now, on this sheet that's on your table, she was selected as the Big Ten Athlete of the Week for field hockey. She scored 4 goals in the 3 games, 1 goal against Stanford. In the first 37 seconds, she scored the first goal. And then against Boston College last week, she scored 2 goals, including the winning goal for the end. So for that, I'm gonna chip in $5. But then I actually have an important item about the Miracle League, which we had to change. We were gonna do the game on the 5th. That's homecoming at the Emmaus High School. So we changed it to the 12th, that's a Saturday, the following Saturday. There's sign-up sheets on the table, there's one in the back. We need the Rotarians for the game that starts at 10, if possible. If you can stay for any other games, just circle it on here and send it to us. We'll keep putting these sheets out, and maybe starting next week or the week after, we'll start collecting candy for the Halloween event. So I'll keep you advised each week. So thanks very much, and appreciate your putting up with me for Peyton, and I'm gonna kick in $5 today.
Thank you, Peyton. And Uncle Bob, because I got a couple more bites of my breakfast in on that one. Thank you. Sal.
Thank you. On your table, you'll see a flyer for Career Exploration Day, sponsored by the East Penn School District Education Foundation. It's October 22nd. It's at the high school gym, the new high school gym that has actually new air conditioning. We invite you, if anyone here is really proud of their career, would like to educate young students as to what you do, please see me. I'll send you over to the table. And I'm glad I followed Bob, because his granddaughter is a living example that public education is alive and doing well. Thank you.
Thanks, Sal. Hey, Doug, just wanted to let you know there's no source found. Are you good?
I guess we'll find
Okay.
out.
I clicked it to see if it would go, but just give you a heads up on that. Mike.
Two quick things. First of all, I need a volunteer for next week on the table. I told that John Kunis would not be able to DL, so if you saw, I put the membership responsibilities out several weeks, just because I'm going away, and I just but can somebody fill in for John? Otherwise, I have to juggle all of those member things to try and figure this out. Can somebody cover for John Kunis on the table next week?
I'm usually here, Mike, I'll sit in and
Well, you'll take care of it, thank you. Second thing, thank you to everyone for helping out with Plant a Row. Everyone who donated to the Plant a Row, the vegetables, could you just stand up? Just really thank you. Just, come on, stand up. We had about a little over 100 pounds of food that was in the 6th Street show. By the way, who had the bag last week, the white bag with 20 pounds of gourds or what? I gotta tell you, that was at least 20 pounds. I didn't see it, but I was right there. That was a huge. Is that all garlic in there?
There was some garlic.
Well, thank you to everyone who contributed to that. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Nicole.
All right, so everyone knows the 19th is Make a Difference Day. We have sign-up sheets back there. I did actually confirm a tree planting event yesterday with the Wildlands for the 19th. It's actually at the Knaus House. And then there's a project nearby after. So I'll need like 8 to 12 people for that. So I'll have a sign-up sheet next week. And I'm gonna send out an email with everything. So you have all the details for everything so you can decide what you wanna do.
Okay. Don.
For those of you that are doing several
Yes.
events
Yep.
on the 19th, remember, I have extra shirts here. $5, you can get another shirt. You don't want to go from one event to another with a stinking shirt. I have assorted sizes here.
Okay. Any other announcements?
Benefit of everybody else, changes.
Ralph?
I just want to let everybody know that I will be going on vacation for the next 2 weeks. One week would be the first meeting of October, when I usually collect food. I will not be collecting there because I'll be in South Carolina, but I will collect food the second week, okay, of October, which is the 10th of October. Our meeting is on the 10th. So if everybody marks their calendar that way, so they're not bringing food in on the 1st of the month, and bring it in the 2nd of the month. And Mike, I'll give you a call to let you know, to put it in the trumpet, that I will be collecting on the second Thursday of October. It's the only month that I'll be doing that. Thank you.
I mean, isn't it ridiculous how organized we are? This is fantastic. And actually, Patrick, Dalton, Gina, isn't it amazing what you're seeing, all the good that Emmaus Rotary is doing? And if you want to be part of that, Rick Zayitz is our membership chair, and he's accepting applications. This morning, he's accepting
I
applications.
have Patrick's application. Jim Palmquist has it.
Awesome, Patrick. All right, Patrick's coming in. So, and just for you guys know, we are on a strong initiative to bring in very strong new members. And from me knowing each of you, you're all very strong members. But once you get ingrained in this club, it really is awesome. You get out of it what you put into it.
That's a big difference from the former members.
That's exactly right.
Thank you, Mark.
Last year was a very boring, slow year. And now this year is, you know, I say that with much love and dishonesty.
Yes.
Okay, any other announcements? Okay, Karen, let's do the raffle.
Okay, raffle. Patrick, you choose a ticket? Okay, come on. Okay, last three numbers. Is 239. 239. 239?
Do it again.
No? Okay. Okay, Patrick, you again.
Just a reminder to anybody over the age of 40, just bring your readers along with you.
She just had a birthday.
285.
This is last week's, I bet.
285?
No, this is them this morning.
This is last
They
week's.
were not last week.
285?
I don't know.
Well, maybe Patrick, I'll move on.
Somebody else. He's gotta be a nice member, but he just can't pick.
Are you reading it upside down? Or?
You can't see it.
273.
I put 50 in.
Okay, that's 3. Don, let's go start in arms.
Yeah, we should just say, go step down for one of the numbers.
Closest without going over. Closest without going over.
No, stop.
Now you can ask for a raise.
Just offer these changes, though.
Hey, Don, all right.
17?
He's got the 2 also on the end.
282.
Last one.
263. There we go. Perfect.
All right, Donnie.
Now, since you complimented Michael Irwin at taking care of the table for us, could Michael Irwin please stand up? I don't see Michael Irwin anywhere. I'm sorry, because he didn't sign in. I just thought maybe he didn't sign in. How much money do you have, Steve? All right.
Make an IOU.
Oh,
I'll pay at the end of the year,
End of the year.
so I can build up some savings.
Dollars.
Yes.
Thank you.
And if you come without a pin and you ask me where you can get a pin, obviously, Elijah, you're gonna be fine. So I can find him, but he does have a pin for future reference. I do have money from people who are leaving early already. I know we have a great speaker coming up, so let's just jump right to the happiness. Mark.
Rick, did we get Bob on tape with the "I'm sorry"?
Yes.
I made a mistake.
It's
I'm
on
wrong."
video.
I think his wife would like to have a.
It's nice to be back again. I'm back from Guatemala City, where 134 children were operated from cleft and lip palate. 70-something were not. We had more than 200 children there. And I want to encourage you, especially younger people, to join the Rota Plus Committee for the district. We need to raise money to continue to do this. and for you to go in these missions. Because when we go to other countries, where we are serving children and parents who come 15 hours from small villages to have their children operated on because they cannot afford it, because their husbands make $7 a day for the family, then you know what Rotary is all about. This is what we are all about, service and helping those who have less than we do. And we travel all the way there to bring smiles and change lives of children and families. So please, join the Rotary Plus Committee if you want to talk to me. We need to raise more money. I want to especially acknowledge Woody, because Woody, this was the last mission where we used money steal from the auctions that you so generously supported for so many years. We don't have much money left. This is the last mission that we paid $150,000 to go. We are right now around 20,000. That's all we have around in the funds. So we need to raise more money. And please, please, I beg you to come and join us and change the children. The parents of the 124 children, I saw about 64, 70 of them, and I have to tell you, every one of them, I'm repeating the words that every parent said to us with tears in their eyes. Thank you, United States. Thank you, people. Without you, I could never afford to operate my child. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia.
Anybody want to follow that?
No.
Doug, come on up. I'm going to save time, Mike, and introduce Doug Reightler. Judge Doug Reightler on birthday of the Constitution.
Sure.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. This is going to be everything you want to know about the Constitution in 20 minutes, so we're just going to breeze right through everything here. And as usual, I need to provide the disclaimer that any of the opinions I'm saying today are only mine. They are not to be reflections as the opinions of the judiciary in Pennsylvania, in Lehigh County, or anywhere else. So, here. And this is not meant to be a debate about the Constitution today. It's just giving you maybe a little bit more information and insight about what led to this. Okay, so, yes, it's 230 years next week since the Constitution was introduced. We have in 1787, the Constitution Convention met in Philadelphia. Anybody know the document which was governing the country before the Constitution?
The Articles of Confederation.
Now, I do apologize. I meant to bring garlic cloves to throw to all of you who got these answers. That's correct. I got this in the rushing out. It was the Articles of Confederation. And there was a reason why the country decided to go to the Articles. We had just finished a Revolutionary War, very opposed to centralized government. So you had many people who were feeling that the last thing they wanted to do was create a new centralized government. So they went instead with the Articles. Originally drafted by Benjamin Franklin in 1775, the version that was eventually submitted was by another Pennsylvanian, John Dickinson, who is notorious from the musical 1776 as being the opponent of the Declaration of Independence. Dickinson actually went on to serve as a very distinguished career here in Pennsylvania as a governor. But this eventually led to the Articles being enacted, and what the emphasis behind the Articles was they wanted to devolve power, they wanted to stay away from centralized government. The epitome of what the writers of the Articles felt was the local jury. They wanted to have the citizenry involved to participate in the decision-making back at the local level, getting power away from a centralized government. However, the Articles of Confederation had very specific powers, and as you can see, you had, they still had some of the things we would assume from our now Congress, providing funds for troops, treating citizens fairly, giving full faith and credit, open trade between the states. But there were certain weaknesses. And one of these was there was a weak central government. States' rights were very much emphasized. The ability for the Congress under the Articles of Confederation still allowed for taxation, but there was no common currency among the 13 states as the country developed. So every state had its own currency. They prohibited the states from declaring war individually against other countries, but this didn't solve all the problems. And of course, we had missing? Anybody know what might be, like, who was the first president of the United States? No, it was actually John Hanson from Maryland. He was the first president. The Articles of Confederation authorized the president of the Congress to be sort of the person fulfilling that. We had 8 presidents of Congress under the Articles, among which was John Hancock, Richard Henry Lee. They only served for terms of roughly 6 months to a year because the job really was just like a figurehead. It didn't really have much to it. So there was no chief executive. There was no judicial branch. Legal disputes between the states were brought to the Congress, and each state was represented by a single vote, who would then identify more or less commissioners to arbitrate on the decisions. The taxes were to be levied against the states in proportion to the value of the land. Who did this benefit to some degree? It was the larger states like Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, that had larger areas than, say, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. And the taxes were paid for by proportion, so it was levied against the value of the land in the states. This wasn't working out. Jefferson and Madison in particular were looking at this from a distance and had a great fear of what was taking place because they had this concern that there were a bunch of shopkeepers and blacksmiths and shoemakers who were getting elected into state legislatures, and they were the ones who were in charge. They had this ability to make the decisions, which the landed gentry, like Jefferson and Madison, were quite concerned with. So they developed this idea of going to the Constitution. They were opposed by people called the Anti-Federalists, who were epitomized by Patrick Henry, whose statement, "Give me liberty or give me death," is sort of associated with that resistance towards moving back to a centralized form of government. The Anti-Federalists have a long history that stemmed all the way down to our 20th century, including Barry Goldwater, whose comments aren't that different in 1964 from those of Patrick Henry back in 1776. Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Moderation in pursuit of justice is no virtue. We had our own version of the Anti-Federalists right here in the Lehigh Valley. Any of you who drive down Willow will drive past the development on the other side of Sauerkraut, where there's John Freeze Drive. And I'm not sure who the developer of that particular neighborhood was, but he may have done this deliberately. John Freeze was an anti-tax rebellion leader from Bucks County. During the Adams administration, there was something called the Quasi-War, where the United States was trying to build up against the French. As a result, John Adams imposed what was called the house tax, which meant that people were now getting taxed by the number of people. The landed gentry had been able to defeat the tax method under the Articles of Confederation. And here in Pennsylvania, John Freeze, who lived not far from here down around the Quakertown area, led a rebellion against the imposition of this tax. Some people in what was then called Millerstown, which we now know as Macungie, were arrested. So Freeze led a group of militiamen over to Bethlehem to free them at the Sun Inn. This picture is to actually signify there was somewhat of a battle down at the Red Line Inn in Quakertown. But so we have our history of anti-tax rebellion. Interestingly, Freeze was eventually arrested, tried, sentenced to death. Adams pardoned him from that on the grounds that as a Pennsylvania Dutch descendant, he was either too stupid or too ignorant of the customs and the laws of the United States.
Now he has a highway.
This incurred the wrath of the Pennsylvania Dutch, and drove them out in large numbers to vote against Adams in the election of 1800, which defeated Adams, who lost Pennsylvania, costing him the presidency and putting into power Thomas Jefferson. So, as you're driving down Willow Creek, you can thank John Freeze as the first property tax opponent here in Pennsylvania. The Articles were eventually disavowed, and the Constitutional Convention was called in 1787, not 1789. In 1787, it actually met for only 5 months. So this document, which still rules us here some 200 years later, was written in all of 5 months. But the concern still was that the Anti-Federalists were very opposed to the centralized form of government. As I said, Jefferson and Madison very worried that these common people were getting the ability to impose laws which they, as the wealthy, were concerned about, and frankly they thought there was going to be a dissolution of power from and mobs and factionalism developing in the country. We didn't have political parties as such at this time, and Madison and Jefferson were concerned about what's happening. They said they felt the legislatures were contributing more uneasiness, which then caused them to want the Constitutional Convention. So, after the passage of the Constitution, the first Congress is created, and one of the things that Madison is charged with is developing this set of sort of appeasing documents to eliminate the uneasiness from some of the states who didn't like the centralized form of government, so they developed the 12 Amendments. Of course, you all know the 12 Amendments from going to school. The first two amendments, this is the first article, and this talks about how enumeration was going to take place and how representation was going to be provided. This was never ratified, as it was circulated among 13 states. The second article was no law varying the compensation of senators and representatives took place until an election intervened, something we have effect to this day in our state constitution. This actually was not ratified at the time, but eventually was brought back up in 1992. It finally got enough states to secure passage, so that became our 27th Amendment, some 203 years after it had originally been introduced. The other 10, which we know as the Bill of Rights, were then ratified finally. I think it was Rhode Island became the last state to approve it. Okay. So some interesting provisions of the Constitution, and I know that all of us have various hobbies and things to get into. I'm not trying to make this very boring, but as I teach in some college classes and take a look at the Constitution, there's some interesting provisions. This particular part, Article 1, Section 9, sounds sort of wordy. The migration or importation of persons, as in any of the states now existing, shall not be prohibited by Congress for up to 20 years. This involved who? Who's this directed at? Slaves. But slavery was such an ingrained part of the country at its founding that the Constitution itself prohibited Congress from even considering any law for the first 20 years of the country's existence of abolishing slavery. The South thought the fervor to do away with slavery would abate in 20 years. The North thought that in 20 years' time there would be enough popular support to do away with slavery. But they agreed to gain the votes of the southern states. We're not even going to consider this for the first 20 years of the country's existence. Could a president disband Congress? There's been a lot of talk lately about over in Britain right now, where the Prime Minister prorogated the House of Commons, more or less said, you're on vacation for the next 5 weeks so I can try to get through Brexit. And the question becomes, could something like that ever happen in the United States? And if you, I don't know if you can all see it, under the Section 3 of Article 2, it says that on extraordinary occasions when the two houses, the House and the Senate, do not agree upon a time of adjournment, the President can adjourn them until such time as he thinks proper. So all the conspiracy theorists right now are saying, okay, well, the House is controlled by the Democrats and the Senate is controlled by the Republicans after the election next year. Could Trump disband Congress if they don't agree on a time of adjournment? And there's nothing in the Constitution that says when they have to be reconvened. So this sort of parlor game conspiracy theory that people like to engage in, theoretically, is in the wording of the Constitution. Can a president be arrested or removed from office? There's a lot of talk last year about, oh, these things are being alleged against the president. Can he be arrested? That would force him out of office. And the Constitutional answer is no. That a president can be arrested, but that does not necessarily cause him to leave the office. That only under impeachment, that is the sole constitutional method by which a president, Democrat, Republican, Federalist, Whig, whatever you want to say, can be removed from the actual office. A person can be charged, but solely the filing of criminal charges against the office holder could not cause him to lose the office of the president. He would have to be impeached, just as the vice president, Justice of the Supreme Court, anybody like that would have to be removed in the impeachment method, which requires the House filing the articles, the trial actually taking place in the Senate. The trial is presided over by the Chief Justice. And this all goes to one of my interesting questions, which is, did Hamilton really dupe Madison? You know, before the big musical came about that has sort of popularized Alexander Hamilton, the dispute between these two was that Madison was very much the architect of the congressional powers under Article 1, because as I said, they thought all the power would rest in particularly in the House. Prior to the amendment of the Constitution, senators, 2 senators from each state, were selected by state legislatures. And that is why there was so much power still in the states. They got to select who's going to represent in the Senate. The House was the only popularly elected body throughout the country. And therefore, Madison felt they would have that mandate of the people. Hamilton, on the other hand, believed in a very strong chief executive power. And I think that so much focus was provided for Madison to create powers of Congress that they sort of missed the boat on the executive branch. very specific powers provided to the legislature, the House, and Senate under Article 1. Article 2, though, not so much. Article 2 involving the presidency and the chief executive, most of the power is vested in what they call the take care clause, which says the president, you're supposed to take care the laws are executed. Very vague, very ambiguous as to what that means, and as a result, over 200 years, presidents have more or less been able to assert inherent powers where if there wasn't something specific that prohibited it, it's assumed the president has the ability to do it. And so that's how we've had the development of very larger and larger powers to chief executives. The irony in all this is the vice president. Nobody quite knows what to do with the vice presidency. When the Constitution was written, the sole role it has is that the vice president's there to break ties. But it doesn't really specify anything else. And as a result, in the last 30 years or so, there's been a body of legal analysis, which is called the unitary executive, which more or less means we in the executive branch have unlimited power to do whatever we want, and we get to say if it's constitutional or not. And we cannot be checked by the legislature in that regard. The epitome of all this is Dick Cheney. Anybody who saw the movie Vice that came out at the end of last year, Dick Cheney recruited a young lawyer named Antonin Scalia back during the Nixon administration, who had this theory that yes, there's great power given to the executive branch because there's no limitations specified in the Constitution. It went so far that David Addington, who was Cheney's chief of staff as vice president, was called up to Congress, and one of the congressmen says, so what are you? Are you in the executive or the legislative branch? And he says, well, both. I'm in both. I'm the presiding officer over the Senate, I'm in the executive branch, but there's nothing that gives me any limitation, and as a result, the powers to provide more and more authority to the president has increased. I only raise this because this will not necessarily be devoted only to, for instance, a Republican presidency. Whatever is done in any administration has effects down the road. So while people may disagree with things that the president is currently doing, it doesn't prevent the next president, perhaps of a different political party, from saying, that president before me was able to do this, I'm going to continue with the exercise of that executive authority. So it doesn't get assigned just to one political party or the other. Which brings us to Article 3, which as the judiciary article, I think is the most interesting. This is where supposedly you could have some kind of limitations on the powers of the Congress and the executive branch. And the ultimate case in this was a case called Marbury versus Madison, some of you may remember from years ago when you were back in school. And this involves sort of the highlights of all the great founding fathers. You have John Adams, who was an outgoing president in 1800. You have John Marshall, who was then became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, but was Secretary of State under Adams. And you have James Madison, who became Secretary of State after Marshall, and Thomas Jefferson, the president who succeeds Adams. So Adams and Jefferson had been close friends, obviously, during the writing of the Declaration of Independence, then came to despise each other, and Jefferson defeats Adams in the election of 1800. They reconcile after years, Abigail being the main person, brings them together, and they actually died each of them on July 4th, 1826, within an hour of each other in separate residences. Adams in Massachusetts, Jefferson down in Virginia. So the background of this is, and just to give you a sense of what makes a lot of the history of the Constitution interesting is how much we can relate to them from our own current political circumstances. So, as I said, Madison hated Hamilton, Jefferson and Adams hated each other. Jefferson beats Adams in a very contested election in 1800. The case of Marbury versus Madison is Marbury is a guy who is more or less like a justice of the peace in Washington, D.C. And on the way out the door, Adams is writing all sorts of commissions to appoint people into office, much as we see today. When the outgoing administration is leaving, they try to stuff the offices full of people. Marshall, as the Secretary of State, was given the ability or the duty to serve these commissions, but things got to be such that they didn't have time to do it in the end. So Marbury never gets his commission from Marshall. When Madison becomes the new Secretary of State, he gets in the office, he sees the commission from Marbury sitting on his desk, and says, I'm not going to give this to the guy who was a Federalist. So Marbury sues Madison, says, I want my commission. The players change a little bit because now Marshall is no longer the Secretary of State. He's been appointed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Jefferson, as the new president, is telling Madison, you're not going to serve this commission. Marshall and Jefferson are cousins. They also hate each other. They came from a close family relationship, but as we've seen somewhat in the decades since this period in the early 1800s, military service became a very big political value. And Marshall, as with Hamilton, served under Washington. Madison and Jefferson did not. In fact, Jefferson was felt to be a little bit of a coward because when the British invaded Richmond during the Revolutionary War, he fled. So there was this sort of manliness competition between these two cousins. And it was felt that Jefferson had gone off to France. He'd been hanging out, drinking lots of wine, hanging out with women in Paris, while Marshall and the rest were trying to fight the war. So they now come to this position where Jefferson and Marshall are at the crux of this dispute. The matter is further complicated by the fact that under the Constitution, the Supreme Court is given what we call original jurisdiction. More or less, it becomes a trial court, but it's limited to certain types of cases, those involving public ministers, of which Marbury was one. So the trial, the original trial, goes to the Supreme Court, and who's the presiding judge? It is John Marshall. John Marshall has a problem, though. He would necessarily be a fact witness, because he would have to be the one who testified. I was supposed to give the commission to Marbury. Marshall realizes he has a problem. So he recruits his brother to perjure himself to say he was the one who was going to deliver the commissions to Marbury. Madison took so little interest in this trial, he didn't even send anybody to the trial to defend him against the allegation. And in fact, the trial had been delayed for 3 years because Congress disbanded the U.S. Supreme Court for a period of time after the 1800 election. So we don't get to this trial until 1803, and Marshall rules in favor of Marbury. It gets appealed up, and who does it get appealed to in front of? John Marshall, who is still the trial judge. So Marshall has this multiple complex roles in this pivotal case, but what it comes down to is that Marshall establishes the judiciary as an equal branch of government. He does it by sort of a sleight of hand. He's saying that, yes, Marbury, you had standing. You had the ability to sue for a commission. Yes, Marbury, you had a legal right. You could petition the court under this Judiciary Act of 1793, and you had a redress by asking me to issue what is called a writ of mandamus. It's this command, a legal command, that I'm supposed to tell another public official something to do. But Marshall realized he had a problem, that if he issued this writ of mandamus to Jefferson and Madison more or less said, "Ugats, it doesn't matter what you say, we're not respecting you, you are the third inferior branch of government, we're not going to do what you want." So he had a problem. So he says, okay, that's fine. I'm going to find that, yes, you have standing, Marbury. Yes, there was a remedy provided by Congress, but Congress, you exceeded your constitutional authority, because under Article 3, Section 2, this is the limitation on what our trial court jurisdiction is. Therefore, you couldn't give us any trial court jurisdiction beyond that, such as giving us the power to issue a writ of mandamus. So we're saying, yes, you had the right to do this. Yes, you had a remedy. But Congress, you exceeded your authority. And it's the first time the court establishes itself as being able to rule on the constitutionality of the actions of either of the other two branches. And Jefferson is infuriated by this because there's nothing he can do now. He won in the end, but he can't now refute his detested cousin's assertion of this constitutional power. So at the end, Marshall is the one who establishes the judiciary as a co-equal, independent branch of government, and the ability for the court to say, this is constitutional or that is not. So that is where we bring ourselves to now. That's your quick 20-second lesson on the Constitution. 8:30, any questions? Yeah, go.
With the, regardless of administration, going back to the September 11th and the wars and the power grab by the executive branches, administrations, is there an impending collision with our judicial branch?
There will be questions that get presented at points when it says, has the executive branch exceeded its power under the War Powers Act, because there's not a declaration of war. You've had various memorandums of understanding or commitments of troops in the legislative fashion. There was a vote, actually, to commit the United States to the war in Afghanistan, but there are those who argue, and again, this is not political, it's just from a legal analysis, that the current establishment of troops has gone beyond that original assertion of power for the president to send troops to Afghanistan. But that gets raised constantly. It got raised when we shot down a airplane in Libya under both President Reagan and the military action under President Obama. Troops in Syria, there's all questions raised about whether that is done with any congressional approval of the assertion of troops into a state of war. So these things come up. The concern by some in this area is that there are so many people now in the federal judiciary who accept the idea of unitary executive power, that the president's assertion of authority is so unchecked that there may be precedent set for future administrations as well to say, well, this administration was able to assert its military power. The court at that time felt it was constitutional. Why can't we do that in succeeding generations? And that's why some people get a little bit disenchanted, because the whole theory of legal analysis is you rely on precedent, what happened in the past, and if courts now disavow what happened in the past without a sufficient legal analysis, people say, well, what can we rely upon if we're moving forward? So,
Is there a law on the books that makes it mandatory for universities to teach the Constitution?
no.
Okay.
No, not mandatory. I mean, we try to have it in public school. Dr. Moore was here to talk about that more than I, or Seal, but that's maybe from East Penn. But, you try to have it in social studies class. But, okay, well, thanks again, yeah.
Is there a limit on how long the states have to approve an amendment?
No, that's why you had that one approved 203 years after. And people said, well, things are floating around out there. That's why there's once in a while talk about reviving the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, that was very popular in the 70s and 80s to establish equality between the genders. They're saying, well, maybe we're going to revive that for further consideration. So
it takes 6 quarters to...
Right, yeah. Okay, thanks again.
Doug, thank you very much. If everyone can just take a notice to the thick notebook of notes that Doug has in his hands. I don't remember him referencing to it at all during that presentation.
It was my crutch.
Very good. Well, I think it would be appropriate if we end today's meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, everybody. Doug, thank you very much.